Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar, The State of the Industry, a Mid-Year Research Roundup. Today's webinar is brought to you by Service Management World in November 11th through 13th in Orlando, Florida. There's a link to the website for Service Management World right in the Attachments tab on your Bright Talk window. And book now, actually before June 28th, for the best discounts. Don't forget to do that. And also, speaking of Service Management World, the HDI Service Management Awards are now open for nominations. There's a link to the nominations form in the Attachments tab on your Bright Talk screen. So nominate your team for an award. There'll be Service Improvement Award, Knowledge Management, Problem Management, and Change Management or Change Control if you're using ITIL 4. Don't forget to give the folks the recognition they deserve. You can connect with HDI on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and our community site, HDI Connect. All you need to do is register, and you have access to all our assets and over 7,000 discussions that are going on HDI Connect. And subscribe to our Spotcast podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. HDI, smarter service, better business. I'm Roy Atkinson, Senior Writer Analyst at HDI, and we have just a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please refresh your browser. It really works wonders. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast, and they'll be answered during the Q&A toward the end of the webcast. You can download the slides from today's presentation by opening the Attachments tab, and be sure to check out the other links that you find there as well. There will be an audience poll today, and you can respond to that in the Vote tab when I make that live below the presentation window. Remember that today's webinar will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live webcast, and you'll receive an email reminder that it's available. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event, so you don't have to worry about that. With no further ado, let's get this party started, and we're going to talk a little bit about industry health today. And as I look at industry health, I think that we need to check out what the hiring outlook is for the coming year, what the turnover rates look like, what the hiring challenges are, and we'll talk about that. Expecting salary changes, up, down, sideways, whatever they happen to be. I think those are all important indicators of industry health. So the first thing we're going to say is, what are the expectations for hiring? And right now, as you can see, more than half of organizations are filling positions that come open. And more than a quarter of organizations are hiring for new positions. So 27% are expanding their staff, and over 50% are hiring for old positions that come open. So there's jobs out there. A smaller portion of organizations, 16%, have hiring frozen, and a very small portion are decreasing the size of their staff. So overall, hiring expectations look pretty good. And what I'm going to do, which we've never done before when we've done one of these reviews, is to look back at previous years and see what the comparisons look like. So right now, 79% of organizations are hiring new or filling existing positions. That's pretty good. It's not spectacular, but it's pretty good. So here's the context of these hiring expectations. The orange bars, again, are organizations that are filling open positions. The blue, organizations that are expanding. The gray, organizations that have hiring frozen. And as you can see, overall, the last couple of years have been pretty good. Contrary to popular belief, this is not a shrinking occupation. It's at least holding steady or growing ever so slightly. Okay? And you can look at those because of the nature of charts and statistics. But as we mentioned earlier, right in the attachments folder, you can download today's slides and look at them more closely if you want to. Let's talk about turnover. We know the hiring looks pretty good. All right, what about turnover? Negative turnover, I consider people who have left the company. They've left the position in the support center or on the team, and they've left the company altogether, so they're gone for one reason or another. What I call positive turnover is they either moved to a different business unit in the company, so maybe they decided to take on a different role, or they changed positions within the support organization. Maybe they got a promotion, or they moved from the service desk into desktop support, or vice versa. So bear those negative turnover, positive turnover in mind. And let's look at what the turnover looks like this year in level 1. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. So left the company, we had 16%. So that's the negative turnover, people that have left the company, 16%. People that have left the support organization but stayed in the company, we've got 6% there. And those who have changed position but stayed in the support organization, we've got 6% there also. Now, I have seen some numbers about turnover in the support center that are much, much higher than this. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think these numbers are good. Maybe those other numbers came from a different selection or size of organizations. I don't know. But this is what we see, and it's borne out later on, and I'll talk about that when we get down to the tenure in position. So that's level 1. Now, that's higher than it has been historically. If you look at the last 9 years, since 2011, this is going from our numbers, which should be relatively consistent throughout the years. We see that this year, that 16% turnover at level 1 is pretty high. Last year was quite low. It remains to be seen which one of those numbers is an anomaly, which one of them is out of place a little bit. Was it last year when it was down to 10%, or was it this year when it's 16%? We don't know yet. We'll have to see as time goes on. Overall, the turnover trend is a little bit up. But, from 14% in 2017 up to 16% today, not that much of an increase, certainly a jump from last year. Now, one of the reasons that this may be happening is that the job market is pretty darn tight right now. Everybody's working, right? Unemployment numbers are very low. Employment numbers are very high. And so, therefore, it may be that people are finding it easy to leave the company and go someplace else and get a similar job, maybe for more money or better benefits somewhere else. We don't know that much about that, but that could be a contributing factor. So let's move up to level 2. These numbers are extremely similar to what they were last year. I didn't delve any farther than that into these, simply because they're right in line with what's gone on in the past. The numbers are fairly low, as you can see. 5% negative turnover, 4% have stayed in the company, and 6% moved elsewhere in the support organization. That's the level 2 folks. And then we move on to desktop support, and we see that 10% have left the company, and that's a little bit higher than it has been in the past. I'll talk about that in a minute. Pretty small numbers that have either moved to a different position in the company or moved to a different position in the support organization. That 10% is a little bit higher, again, similar to the level 1 support, although that was quite a bit higher, 16%. And it also may be that these people are finding better jobs or better benefits somewhere else. It also may be that organizations are decreasing the size of their desktop support staffs, which we know has been a trend. And so those people may be, in fact, experience some attrition. Now, what happens when those people leave the company? How do you hire them? How do you hire for those positions? Because as we said earlier, more than half of organizations are refilling those positions, and about 25% are actually expanding. So how challenging is it to fill those positions when they become open? And as we can see from this, most organizations are having at least a little bit of a challenge. So somebody just asked what time frame is covered by these stats. we do these surveys annually. So this is 1 year, except for the overall view between 2011 and now, which I did for historical context. So this is 1 year's worth of HDI research. We do a big industry report every year. We release it in segments. This is from the staffing and salary segment, which will come out a little bit later, probably about a month from now. We'll release that to the public, okay? So I'm going to mark that as answered. And we'll come back to the other question about turnover rates. Everybody clear on that? It's a 1 year time frame for these stats, unless I say otherwise. Okay. So these positions, as you can see, a lot of them are fairly difficult to find replacements for, especially when we look at the service management positions. And you might, as expected, see some difficulty in replacing a director-level person. That's going to take a little extra effort, of course, to get the right person in that position. But in almost every one of these positions, either there's a really challenging, which is the blue bars, or somewhat challenging, which is the orange bars. There's no comparison here. We just asked, is it challenging, somewhat challenging? You can see that the percentages are pretty high. So it's not easy to replace people when you lose them. So that's something to consider. If you're in a supervisory or a management capacity, make sure that your folks are staying happy, because when they leave, it's going to be expensive and difficult to get somebody else who's going to be able to capably fill that same position that you just gave up. Okay? Now, earlier on, I mentioned that there are some numbers floating around in the industry about turnover that are substantially different from the numbers that we see in our research. They're quite a bit higher, and I'm going to talk about that here. Simply because these numbers, we asked, how long are people in their positions on average? From your staff, how many of them have been here for how long? And so this is at level 1, support center analysts, and you can see a third of them have been there for 2 years, okay? And then some other percentages as time goes on, and I'll add them up for you in a second. But what I'll point out is I've seen some numbers around that turnover in support center is 40%. In light of these tenure numbers, that does not make sense. These numbers tend to bear out our numbers, which is much lower. All the total turnover, positive and negative, and remember I defined them, positive being people who stay in the company or stay in the support staff, negative being those who leave. If you add those all up for level 1, it's 28%. So 28% have either left or changed roles within the organization. That makes a lot more sense with these numbers, because with these numbers, 78% of the people have been there for 2 years or longer, and 53% have been there more than 2 years. So if you had 40% turnover at the service desk, these numbers would be totally different. So I tend to believe our numbers are correct, and they should be consistent because the same organizations are answering them. And as the report becomes available and you look at the spread of organizations and organization size and where they're located and all that, you will see that it's a pretty broad spectrum of organizations, although for us at HDI, the sweet spot for our research is between 1,000 and 5,000 employees, roughly. We have lots of organizations that are bigger than that, but that's really the highest percentage fall in that range. So other people may be looking at organizations that are bigger on average. I don't know, but there's some interesting variation in that number. I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so that's level 1. We can see that people are, 2 years and above. And this other one I selected simply because there's a kind of a red flag here for me, and I'm going to point it out that 24% of support center managers have been in the position for more than 10 years. Right? This isn't just working at the same company. These numbers, the tenure numbers, represent how long they've been in that position. So a quarter of all service managers, support center managers, service desk managers have been in that position for more than 10 years. So let's look back at 2009 and think about how different things were in 2009. I'm not saying that these people need to leave, but you certainly better make sure that they're getting the proper updates and training and that they're progressing in their own personal and professional development in order to be in a position that long. That's a very long time to be in one spot, heading up the same team. So let's think about that. If you're a support center manager, make sure you're staying current on trends in the industry. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the changes that will be occurring with metrics later on. We'll just reference that in a different section of this webinar. Okay? So this chart shows how positions are compensated, and it's really easy to look at this. It looks a little bit like a flag if you look at it from a distance. And you can see the orange sections are people who are compensated on an hourly basis. The blue are the people who are compensated on a salaried basis, not hourly. This is where we differentiate between salaried and hourly. When I refer to salary a little bit later on, I'm talking about compensation. But you can see that generally speaking, the hourly positions are the ones at the frontline positions, and the salaried ones are the supervisors, managers, directors, and so forth, with some notable exceptions, but very, very small percentages. Okay? That's how folks get compensated. So if you have hourly folks on your team, it's not unusual at the level 1, level 2 in desktop. Okay, but here's the fun part now. What's going on in terms of salary? Is it going up, going down? So in the last 12 months, organizations, this is percentage of organizations, so 54% of organizations have increased, and 46% have stayed about the same in salary. So more than half have had salary increases. We don't know how big. This is percentage of organizations, not percentage of salary or anything else. And interestingly enough, this year, when we look ahead for the next 12 months, starting when the survey was in the field a month ago or so, we find that the percentages are identical. About 54% of organizations expect that they're going to have a salary increase, and 46% expect it to stay about the same. So compensation is increasing. As we said earlier, the industry is in fairly good health in terms of hiring, and in terms of tenure, and in terms of outlook. So salaries are looking okay. All right, now we're going to transition to knowledge management. And before we start our discussion on this, I'm going to put a vote in the field here. So I'm going to pose the question. If you go over to the vote tab, you'll be able to see this and participate. Please do take part in it. We like to see how you think. And it's a simple question. How is your organization doing with knowledge management? Are you just getting started? Are you in the process of struggling with it? Are you having trouble getting your analysts and users to take advantage of it? Are you doing great and find knowledge management very valuable? Or did you try it and give up? So let's take a couple of minutes to think about that. Put your vote in. Are you just getting started with knowledge management, struggling with it, having trouble getting analysts and users to take advantage of it, doing great and find knowledge management very valuable? Or did you try it and give up? Okay, the votes are coming in. That's great. Make sure we get everybody's vote. And then after I stop the voting, it'll tabulate for me, and I'll tell you what the numbers are. Okay, everybody vote. All right, I'm going to stop the voting now. And I'll just give the numbers a second to tabulate. Okay, so here's what we see. About 18% of you are just getting started. 27% are struggling. 34% are having trouble getting analysts and users to take advantage of it. So a third of you. 21% of you say you're doing great and find knowledge management very valuable. Well, if you were all in the same room, I would tell you in that 21% who are doing great and find knowledge management valuable to explain to everybody else how you're doing that. But we're going to look at some numbers from a research piece that we did, which you can get now. It's available to you from HDI Connect, and connect.thinkhdi.com is where you want to go for that. And if you don't have an HDI connection in the community, if you weren't an HDI member, then you can just register. It's free of charge. You can get in there and get access to all our research. You can look at our research reports from the past and everything you need. So you might want to take a look at that knowledge management research, but I'm going to talk about that fairly extensively today. So about a third of you, remember that number, about a third of you are having trouble getting analysts and users to take advantage of it, and about 26% of you are struggling with knowledge management. So let's talk a bit more about that. So right now, we see that but they don't have a timeline for it. And as we also found in this particular research that we did, a lot of organizations are having trouble getting budget for knowledge management. So why is knowledge management important now? I could not let this opportunity go by. We're going to talk a little bit during this knowledge management portion about artificial intelligence. It's on everybody's lips, right? Every place you turn, there's an article about AI, something about AI taking your job, or AI doing this, or AI doing that. One of the things to bear in mind is that artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, whatever you want to call it, is dependent on getting information into the system. And one of the ways that AI is not doing well is in absorbing knowledge from organizations. And the reason for that is that people do not have good knowledge management in place. Their knowledge is scattered all over the place, right? Or it's not documented at all. When I was managing a support team, I had one person that worked for me who used to put comments in tickets like, made some changes. That doesn't help, all right? And that's not uncommon. Or people would just put a period in the comments just so there was a character in it and it would allow them to mark the ticket resolved. That is not good because it doesn't help anybody else. AI, as powerful as it might be, cannot get knowledge out of your team's heads. It can only absorb knowledge and information and data from the systems that exist that it has access to, right? So it needs to have knowledge to absorb and learn from. Can't have machine learning if it doesn't have information to learn, all right? So how's it going, basically, in knowledge management? And as you can see, about 35% of the organizations that we polled are very satisfied with it. So that's a little bit higher number than we had today. We had 21%. And then we had a large portion that were somewhat satisfied with their knowledge management program. A small percentage somewhat dissatisfied, and a tiny portion were very dissatisfied. Overall, about a third are very satisfied with their knowledge management program, and we'll delve into this a little bit. Why do you have a knowledge management that doesn't meet your company's expectations? Well, we had this today. We had a percentage of you responded that you were having trouble getting analysts and users to adopt it. So 28%, the highest percentage of organizations that responded to this, said we cannot get users to adopt it. So we set up this self-help system, and we can't get users to partake. 27% said it's a lot more work than we anticipated. Remember that this does take work. This is not super difficult, but it is a lot of work to organize and document and feed this all into systems that are built to have structured knowledge in them. Now here's about 16% said we can't get analysts to use it, and 4% said it's costing time and money instead of saving both. And then we have this, normally when we ask a question that has a choice that's other, we get a small percentage of people who say it's something else. It's not listed among the choices that we were given here. It's something else. In this particular question, a quarter of the people chose other. And of course, we had an open text field for comments. And boy, did we get them. We had 38 printed pages of comments. And I went through them all, and a very interesting thing happened. When we said, what's going on? And I'm drawing your attention to the fact that we can't get users to adopt it, because I'm going to hammer on that very hard in a minute or two. When I went through all of those comments in the other, here's what I found. They've tended to fall very neatly into one of these four categories. Either there was reluctance to create and use knowledge. Okay, we just looked at we can't get analysts to use it, we can't get users to adopt it. Right, there it is. That's the reluctance to create knowledge and reluctance to share it. If we go down to the technology part, we need a good user interface, need a better search tool, need a less clunky tool. And I will tell you that I put the word clunky in this particular little diagram for a reason. That word was used over and over and over and over again in those comments. The people said, our tool is too clunky. We need a tool that isn't clunky. We want a less clunky tool. So that's the way knowledge management tools feel to a lot of people. They feel clunky. They're hard to use. They're awkward. Okay, so fine, we get that. That's another reason why this is difficult. If we look at the right side here, buy-in, leadership support, and higher priority. In other words, we're not getting the time and resources we need to get the knowledge management done. And then the workload itself, there's no time to keep it up to date. It's too much duplication of information. You know, we have knowledge elsewhere that duplicates this. People don't know where to look, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the four categories in which all of those other comments fell into. And I will tell you there are probably one or two other comments in that of all of those 25% that did not fall into one of these categories. And they basically were duplications of something that we asked in the question. So it was amazing to me when I looked at them and started analyzing those responses, what happened. So now let's think about it. We can't get users to adopt it was the biggest reason why people were struggling with their tool, right? And then here we see that there's reluctance to create knowledge and reluctance to use and share knowledge, and that's on the part of both analysts and users. So if we're not using it internally and we have a hard time with it, and we think our technology is clunky, and we don't have management buy-in, then what are we displaying to the folks that we're trying to convince to use it? if we're not enthusiastic about it, or if we don't feel the tool works well, or if we don't partake in this whole idea of knowledge sharing helping the organization, then they're going to get that message loud and clear, whether we broadcast it verbally or not. And so it's a cultural issue that you have to make your minds up as to whether you're going to do this knowledge management thing or you're not. And if you expect down the road to be able to use some emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and predictive analytics and that sort of thing, you really have to have your data and your knowledge ducks in a row. You really, really need to do that. I also thought it was very interesting to look at what was the primary goal of setting up a user-facing knowledge base in the first place. Why did your organization decide to give users the ability to look up solutions for themselves? And the big answer was they wanted it. It was responding to demand from the users to be able to fix things for themselves. And that was in 33% of organizations. So on the one hand, we have people wanting to fix their own issues and look up their own answers. And on the other hand, we have a very tough time getting users to adopt self-help. What's that all about? Well, that tells me that somewhere in the execution of the knowledge management systems, there's a problem. And before we get too deep into that, let's look at some of the other reasons why organizations set up user-facing knowledge. And one of them was to free up resources, to save a little money, to avoid having to hire more people, basically workload and financial reasons why organizations did that. And one of the things I would point out is that if you get the first one right, if you get that responding to demand by users to be able to look up their own solutions, if you get that right, all of the other things are going to follow. Because if they can look up their own resolutions, they're not going to be contacting you, right? They're going to be using the self-help as much as they possibly can. They don't want to sit in a queue. They don't want to wait for you to respond. They don't want to wait for results of research. They don't want to wait for escalations. They want to look these things up and resolve them for themselves. If you get that part right, all of the other things, the cost cutting, the lower need to hire and more resources, all of that falls right into place. And so make sure you get that part right. Well, what does that mean exactly? Let's look at something that almost every organization has. Frequently asked questions. And my question on this slide is, are they really frequently asked questions? So how are they created, we asked. And what we found is that over 80% of organizations said that the FAQs are written by support staff. Do you see the problem? Okay. In some other organizations, about 2/5 said seeded by support staff with user questions added as they come in. Okay, that's a little better. But only 35% said they're actual questions from users. Do you think that, and stop and think about this one for a minute, do you think that users do not see the fact that in most organizations the FAQs are written by support staff? Of course they do. Because, first of all, they're not the types of questions that most users ask. And second of all, they're not written in a language most users use. And this is a substantial historical problem with user-facing knowledge. What happens historically, and I remember reading a Gartner report several years ago on this that bore this thinking out. Organizations set up user-facing knowledge. They have a tough time getting users to use it. They put effort into it, but it doesn't work. They can't get people to adopt it. And so what happens, instead of figuring out what happened and trying to improve on it, they abandoned it. They just gave up. And that's why I asked that question in the audience poll, did you used to do it and just gave up on it? Luckily, very few of you had. But this is one of the reasons that users are not adopting it is because it's from the internal point of view, the support point of view, as opposed to their point of view. It's very important that the questions come from the users. And one of the things you might want to do is go out and talk to them, see what questions they have that you don't have included in your knowledge base. Try to get them in there, get them engaged, because it's so, so important. So in the answer to the question, are they really frequently asked questions? The answer is no, they are not. They are things that we made up. and believe me, I've done it. I did it early on in my career. I sat there and wrote what I assumed would be the frequently asked questions for an email system, and I was right sometimes, but it wasn't okay. So make sure that you're really responding to your users. All right, what features and benefits would you want in a dedicated knowledge management tool? Remember, we said that people thought that their technology was clunky. So what do you want to see? Well, the ability to integrate with your ticket management system is a good idea. You don't want to have to be looking a multitude of places to get the answers that people need. You want it pretty handy. So if it integrates with your tool, or even if it's built into your tool, then it should work better. Ease of administration, for sure. You want to be able to decide who gets to see what, which answers are user-facing, which are not, because not everything that you want to document, you basically want to document everything, and not all of that needs to get shown to the users. AI assistance for users. Now, this is becoming an interesting topic simply because there are several tools now on the market that have AI-assisted, machine learning-assisted knowledge management capabilities. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. The ability to include rich media. A surprisingly high number want that don't have it, apparently. You want to be able to do videos. How many of you, and I'm asking this rhetorically because you won't be able to respond verbally or otherwise, how many of you have gone to YouTube to look up how to do something? And it's almost, you can look up almost anything. I needed to replace the hood struts, or the bonnet struts as they're called on British cars, on my vintage Jaguar. And so where did I go to learn how to do that? I went to YouTube to see a video of exactly how to pop the old ones off and put the new ones in. There's a bazillion videos, almost literally up there, about almost anything. Wouldn't it be nice for your users to be able to have that kind of resource in your knowledge base? How do I do this? How do I use this application? What, right? You want to be able to use the rich media and show people how to do things, not just tell them in long-winded articles, but actually explain to them in a video or an audio, whatever, how to do it. So rich media is a really powerful tool for your users to be able to use. Automated resolutions, cool. So if there's a tool or something in your self-help that helps diagnose and repair, have the user click on it, bang, zoom, it's done, automated. KCS, Knowledge Centered Service, which is the most widely used knowledge management methodology that we've ever found, is certainly a good thing to have. If you're going to use KCS, you want a KCS-compatible system. AI assistance for analysts. So what kind of assistance might that be? There are actually systems on the market right now that can talk in the ear of the analyst while they're on the phone with somebody or in a chat with somebody, that can suggest articles that they may want to look at or things that they may want to say. Okay? That's where we are with AI. It's getting there very rapidly, and so being able to be right in the context of what's going on in front of you and have that AI assistance in your ear or on your screen is there now, and you can take advantage of it. Compatibility with other tools, tools used by other business units, is also one of the things that's relatively important, at least to about a third of organizations. And we'll see why in a second, because of the people who consume the knowledge that is created. does your organization plan to invest in knowledge management in the next 12 to 18 months? Well, this is where the rubber meets the road, as the saying goes. Is the organization going to spend money on a knowledge management program? And about 31% of you said, yes, we've got a plan and a budget. And then 43% said, we want to do it, but we don't have a budget. And then about 26% says we don't have a plan to invest. So over a quarter said they don't have a plan to invest in knowledge management right now. And I would advise, if your organization is in that position and you're not planning on investing in knowledge management, then you might want to rethink where you're going to be in a few years when a lot of these automation and AI and machine learning tools really come into play. They're really gathering strength. They're being released on the market every day. And as I mentioned, data and knowledge management are right up there in the realm of things that you must have in order for these tools to work properly. So start getting your knowledge management system going if it isn't already. Okay, so here's the business areas that participate in knowledge management, and the blue part is people who create knowledge, and the orange part is people who consume knowledge. And so, of course, technical support creates a ton of knowledge because things happen all the time, goes wrong. We figure out what the solution is, we create an article for it, or whatever it is, we document the solution, we're creating knowledge, and also consuming it. But look at all the other business units that are consuming a lot of knowledge. And what you need to remember when we talk about knowledge management is it's not just for support. It's not just for the service desk. It's not just for IT. There should be knowledge management across the organization. And if there are knowledge management initiatives in different parts of your organization, you might want to look into their success and how they're doing it and what their tools are like, and make sure that you've got a tool that's compatible, because knowledge shared is knowledge gained, right? You don't lose knowledge by sharing it, you gain knowledge by sharing it. So make sure that you're doing that. It's across the organization, really important. So what is the view of artificial intelligence in terms of self-service? Is it negative or positive? And as you can see, it's fairly overwhelmingly positive. Well more than half of organizations said that we feel positively about it, and about 2/5 said we're neutral about it. Only a very small portion said that we're not really favorable. And both the staff and the users in these organizations had positive feelings about AI. But on the other hand, does your company have an overall AI strategy? Do you know how you're going to use AI? Do you know what kinds of tools you're looking for? What kinds of capabilities you need it to have? How it's going to integrate with what you're doing now? How is it going to change what you're doing now? And one of the things I mentioned earlier is that your metrics are going to change substantially when you start using these tools. And they're going to happen in consequence of knowledge management, and they're going to happen as a consequence of automation, with RPA, robotic process automation, or other types of automation, because the low-hanging fruit, as the business jargon has it, the easy stuff is going to disappear right off your plate. You're not going to be doing repetitive work over and over and over, password resets over and over and over, one-off, restart your computer, everything will be fine over and over and over. You're not going to be doing that. You're going to be doing more challenging work. Now, that's good news for you, I hope, because you're going to have your thinking caps on in order to get through a workday. But at the same time, it means that the metrics that you're collecting are going to change radically. All the easy one-and-done first contact resolution stuff is going to diminish. So your FCR numbers are going to go down. And we've talked about this in other presentations and other places, how your metrics are really going to change You need to start communicating that to your management now. When we put these tools in place, when we start convincing the users to take advantage of our knowledge management systems, things are going to change. Obviously, if they're able to look up a solution and implement it right then and there, fix their own issues, and not contact you, all those one and dones are going away. And that means that your easy old, metrics that 80% first contact resolution rate is going to take a nosedive. Now, add to that fact that we've been talking about shift left for years, and many of you organizations are doing it. You've brought more difficult tasks down to level 2, down to level 1, and out to self-service, and that has already diminished some of those one and done that you used to have, the one and done contacts that you used to have. So this means that level 1 is going to be more challenging. It's going to take longer. Your let's take a stat like your handle time or your call time is going to go up. Your FCR is going to go down. Your queue might be longer. There's a whole bunch of different metrics that are going to happen because you are using some more advanced methods of assisting people. And it's important to note that. Okay? So here's the thing about the clunky tool problem. The right tool makes it easier to create and share knowledge. It reduces the workload, and it drives knowledge consumption. That's easy peasy. And you will see this in that report if you download it from HDI Connect. It is called The State of User-Facing Knowledge and Knowledge Management in 2019. And it's a good report. You should definitely take a look at that. Okay. So here's what we know so far. We know that support is generally healthy, right? More than half of organizations are filling positions, and about a little bit more than a quarter are creating new positions in the support staff. Turnover is a bit of a concern. We'll look at that again a year from now when we get new numbers in and see which way it's headed, but it did take a jump this year at level 1. Not so much at level 2, not so much in other positions, but level 1 had a spike in turnover as in terms of leaving the company. Is it just the job market? Is it other things? We don't know yet. Salaries are increasing in more than half of organizations. It's the key to the future, and I tend to harp on that, but it's really important, really, really important. We need to do a better job of user-facing knowledge. Make sure that you understand how user-facing knowledge works and what terminology you need to use and how to make sure it's easy for them to use. If it's clunky in any way, shape, or form, they're not going to use it. They're simply not. They're going to expect you to step up to the plate. I mean, we all would like to be like Amazon or Google or some of the other organizations that make things really easy to use. That's how you want to do it. You want to make it a good user experience for them, and amazing things will happen. Some of them are going to be maybe not what you expected, like I just said in terms of metrics. If it's great for your users, it might not be great for your historical metrics. So be prepared that you're going to. Knowledge is not just for support, not just for IT. It's important across the organization. And good technology is an enabler for that, whether we're talking about regular knowledge management tools or if they're AI-enabled. And there's some articles on Support World about how AI can assist. But think of it this way. Think of being in a context. For example, writing a Microsoft Word document and something unexpected happens to Microsoft Word. Oh, what do I do now? Do I pick up the phone and call the service desk? If there's an AI-assisted tool in your organization, what might happen is that it will pop up and say, we see that Microsoft Word is having a problem. Here are some suggestions you can try. Here are some knowledge articles you might want to look at. Whatever it happens to be. It's right there in the context no matter what. If you're in an application, if you're doing email, if you're on a website, it's contextually aware. So take a look at some of those tools. They're pretty amazing. Okay, it's question time. So let's see what you're asking. somebody has a comment that says, but the cool thing about metrics like average handle time getting longer, it should show in correlation to the changes in use of the AI, et cetera, so you can prove the strategy that AI is, knowledge management and AI is working. Absolutely true. That's exactly right. They're going to change in ways together, right? The use of your self-help, your user-facing knowledge is going to go up, and those metrics that indicate the one-and-dones, that like FCR, are going to go down, opposite each other. Metrics are not like a building. They're more like fabric. When you pull on a thread on the right side, something happens over on the left side that changes as well. So the metrics are really bound together like a fabric. Think of them that way, and that's a very good comment. Okay? Are the reasons why turnover in both level 1 and desktop support went up the same reasons? Is it just due to the job market? Well, as I mentioned, that's one of the things we think. It will be interesting to see where the job market is next year and what the turnover rates are like next year when we do this particular report. If the job market has tightened up even more and it's more challenging to replace people and it's easier to change jobs, without taking too high a risk, the turnover rate may go up again. It's hard to say at this point. So we don't know why they're the same. I'm going to take an educated guess, and you can quote me on this, but make sure that you quote the fact that it's an educated guess, that a fair portion of that turnover in level 1 support is due to the job market, and a fair portion of the turnover and desktop support is due to organizations thinning out their desktop support. We'll see how that bears me out in the next series of reports that we do. You said we have to do work to prepare for AI. I thought the whole point of AI was to remove work from people. What do we have to do and why? Well, I think what you need to do is make sure that you have things structured in such a way that these automated tools and artificially intelligent systems have access to them, that they can learn easily where to look to find information, and that the information is presented in such a way that it can be easily consumed. Because what these systems are going to do is find the information and display it to humans for the most part. At least now. Maybe in the future they'll talk more to each other. Maybe in the future the AI will actually reach into your computer and fix what's wrong. But we're not there yet. So what you need to do is organize it and make sure that the stuff is getting documented. As I said, if you've got people in your organization that are saying, I made some changes, without going into any detail, that is not helpful to anybody. It's certainly not helpful to your manager, take it from me, and it's certainly not helpful for the future use of artificial intelligence or machine learning. How exactly can AI help with user-facing knowledge? Well, I think I talked about that a little bit when I was talking about how it can be in context with people. It can be where they are and present solutions based on the exact thing that they're experiencing right there. Also, it can look across a broad range of things very fast. We know the technology can be extremely fast. And, for example, let's say the doctor's iPad is not allowing him to log in or her to log in. Then perhaps the artificial intelligence can see that there's a problem with the domain controller, that a certain setting has been changed, can change the setting back, come back, and tell the doctor, you can log in now within a matter of seconds. It's going to be stuff like that, okay? Will HDI ever consider publishing or discussing metrics by industry? That's an interesting question, and I think part of that is based on the number of responses that we get. Let's say we get 1,000 responses to a survey that we put in the field. When you split that across 100 industries, now we've got 100 responses for each, but they're not equal, right? We're going to get a higher response from people in higher education, which is one of our strongest community components. We're going to get a higher response from people in healthcare IT, which is one of our strongest areas. We're going to get a higher response from people in software development industry because that's one of our strongest components. So maybe we'll only get 15 or 20 responses as opposed to 100 in some industries. That's not statistically useful. We can't do anything with 15 responses. And if you've ever studied statistics, you know the magic number is 30. That's a very low number and has a high rate of doubt associated with it, but that's the lowest number you can go. So we'd have to have a very high rate of participation from every industry. So I don't see that forthcoming. There are some industries that we can segment, and we sometimes do. Excuse me. We've done some reports that specify the public sector, like government, healthcare, and education. Somebody's just saying hi. Hi, Ryan. How are you? Thank you. Any indication how ITIL-4 DevOps Agile shift affect organizations? They're going to affect organizations in many different ways, and I think part of that question is I don't expect that ITIL-4 adoption is going to change things too much, because what ITIL-4 does is it changes the emphasis from process to value. And I think, if anything, it's going to help people understand how to be more valuable to their organizations, and that's a really good thing. DevOps and Agile are a little bit different. It's that those are ways of getting things done, and that it could affect organizations for sure. This is probably a much longer conversation than we can have here. You should be able to reach me if you want to discuss this at some length. I'd love to talk about it. DevOps, I think, has things to teach service management. Agile methodologies are being adopted left, right, and sideways in organizations right now. So we could certainly have a conversation about that at some point. Missed the first part. When will this recording be available to view? It'll be available within minutes. Certainly within an hour. Some of that depends on the BrightTalk system and reproducing it, but it will be very, very fast. And you will get a reminder email tomorrow that it's available if you happen to not be able to get back to it today. Your knowledge management process, not clunky in your particular tool? Good. That's great. Wondering if turnover rates are currently indicative digital transformation, kept or moved people in different roles. Well, that the big spike that I talked about and we have to put this in when I talk about a big spike, it went from historically about 11% of frontline people leaving the organization, leaving the company, to 16 people leaving the company, 16% of people leaving the company. It's not a big spike, but in historic context, seeing 16% as opposed to 11% is a fairly good-sized spike. So I don't think we can talk about digital transformation in that context. It's people leaving the company. So we're not seeing mass layoffs. And remember, we looked at the other side of that, which is who's hiring and who's filling new positions, who's creating new positions, and they're both historically consistent. So I think it probably doesn't have too much to do with that. Recommendations on knowledge management tools that aren't clunky. We at HDI are vendor neutral and don't recommend any particular tools. I will be at Service Management World. These are great questions. Thank you. And for that one, I'll say you're welcome. Wondering if turnover rates are indicative. Okay, saw that one, answered that one. All the questions have been answered. Look at that. And right on time. Aren't we lucky? All right. So let me say this. Our next webinar is on July 16th. Please take a minute or two and rate the webinar. Let us know how we're doing, because we do look at our ratings as we plan for the future. And I will say that this webcast is copyright 2019 by Informa Tech. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers, that would be me, are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Remember that a lot of this is my educated guess or opinion. So thank you for attending today. Thanks for asking questions and giving your feedback. I appreciate it, and have a great month until our next webinar. Take care.